In this video, I'm going to share with you some key lessons I learned in my first 2 businesses in the broadcast industry. Hey, I'm Andrew Henderson, and in this video, I'm going to share with you the lessons that I learned from my very first business ventures, the businesses that I started getting into when I was 19 years old, and what was, up until Nomad Capitalist, probably my biggest hit, the thing I was most passionate about, the thing I had the best results with. And so I want to share this with you because a lot of people have asked, what did Andrew do before Nomad Capitalist? What was the business he was in? He was paying all these taxes that was the last straw that caused him to move out of the country. We want to know what Andrew's background is. And so, as I said, kind of the most defining business that I ran was in the broadcast industry, primarily in the radio industry, and primarily from there in the talk radio industry. I did have very little experience actually being on the radio. Got that from my father. It wasn't really my goal to be on the radio, as other than a side hustle. I wanted to be in the business side of radio because the radio business itself is not such a hot commodity then. It wasn't so much of a hot commodity even when I got into it back into the mid 2000s. But what there was still an opportunity in what I call the unsexy business. To go into the music side of the business, to go into the part of radio that people find attractive. There was no money there, and there's really no money there now. So what we did was we carved out a niche, basically connecting people who had a longer form message with programming time. So for example, you host a show about investing. You've got a particular take on investing. You want to do a show that's somewhat educational, but also promotes your business. And so, it's hard to talk about a fixed indexed annuity, for example, in a 30-second ad. And so you want to educate people about that, and you want to produce a series of 60-minute shows to do that. And so, we could help you find time to put that show in the air and find radio stations that would take your money. And eventually what we would do is we'd start finding new opportunities. We would use our clout and go to radio stations and say, hey, why don't you open up this time and let us do it? And we increasingly opened up, better and better and better radio stations. And, unfortunately, radio being already in decline, as a guy who grew up around the radio business, as being my father's side hustle, I kind of hated to see the decline of radio. But what I realized is the radio is going to decline with or without me. We were able to find an area to make money. So I learned a couple key lessons from my time working in the radio industry. And the first lesson is one that I think a lot of veteran entrepreneurs are very familiar with. It's always different and difficult to sell things to a corporate environment. One of the first things that we did early on that didn't really work was taking on syndication clients who had more of what's called a quality show. They weren't pitching fixed index annuities or whatever. They just had a radio show, and we tried to help them get distribution by putting their show on different stations around the country. The challenge is when you're in syndication, the really good stations that you want to be on, most of them were owned by big corporations. Clear Channel, iHeartMedia, CBS. I mean, the players have all changed again because the industry is in turmoil. But these are big corporations. If you've watched my videos, I'm not a very corporate guy. I've never had a corporate job in my life. I don't know how it works. I don't have that demeanor. I don't have the diplomacy of just constantly taking meetings and discussing everything. I like to get things done. And so you can imagine that when my approach and my attitude, got, what we had to go out and take that and sell to people in a corporate environment, it didn't do very well. And so what I learned very early on in life was when you're dealing with big corporations, and I suppose you could also look at, hospitals, the healthcare industry, terrible industry to sell into, the government, the worst, right? You're going to have a much longer sales cycle there. It's going to be much more difficult. I just determined early on that wasn't for me. That was the first lesson I learned. I liked working with nimble organizations where I could get honest feedback and I could get relatively quick answers. And what was interesting is we had 2 parts of the business. Once the syndication thing didn't work, we had 2 parts of the business. I had on my own kind of a more bespoke service working with larger clients. And I had a business partner where we did a more retail service where we would come to you if you were a mortgage broker in Miami and say, hey, do you want to host a radio show? We can do that. And what's interesting is we also tried to talk to people in the healthcare industry. Hey, you're a doctor. Hey, you're a dentist. Why don't you be the preeminent dentist and host a radio show talking about dental care? And you can educate people on dental care, or whatever. We had a OBGYN doing a women's health show. I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. And healthcare was so much more difficult to sell into, because even though an individual doctor himself might be nimble, there's this kind of industry itself that was a cloud over everybody underneath it, where just the healthcare industry just moves very slowly. We found a lot of success working with people in the financial industry, because you'd have solo practitioners, you'd have small organizations that on the retail side, they're just much more nimble and they saw the benefits much more quickly. So number one, work with nimble organizations. From my perspective, work with people who see the value, where that nimbleness, turns into actual results and turns into actual sales. Okay, that's number one. Number two, again, common sense, but something that a lot of business owners, in fact, I would dare to say most business owners don't follow. Deal with successful clients, not poor clients. Deal with rich clients, not poor clients. What was interesting is seeing both sides of the business. Basically, I had two companies. And you can call it one business, you can call it two businesses. I separate it because it was two different lines of business. And again, one had a partner, one didn't. So they kind of operated on their own until at the very end, I bought the partner out of what was then a not as big retail business and just put them together. But what was interesting is all those years that we spent going out and doing direct mail and calling people who were on the retail side, again, the mortgage brokers, the real estate agents, all of that, we had a lot of success with that. But, it's the cardinal rule of business is that those clients took up a lot more of our effort. They were more difficult to sell. They were more difficult to convince. Some of them were what I would now call disagreeable, where you just probably shouldn't have sold to them. You should have said, great, don't be, we'll sell your competitor. It's okay, don't worry. But they were just a lot more effort, okay? And so for me, what I really learned is I don't like volume. I like things that can scale at low volume. And so to be successful in a retail business where you're charging, a mortgage broker to be on one radio station $600 a week, your wholesale cost is $200 a week, you're providing some training and support and some expertise for the spread, that guy might be on the radio for 6 months or for a year. And you need a lot of volume to make that a very big business. And it's hard to get volume because, you're constantly recruiting people, because, a dentist probably, doesn't have the stamina to do a show for 5 years. He's busy being a dentist, right? And maybe he feels he's said everything. So it's very hard to scale, okay? And so what I really learned is not only that's a very common thing. You want to determine your customer's lifetime value, but also the people, I've got a good friend to this day. We had, a 7-figure contract per year, and we worked together for several different years. He basically was the manager of a kind of a very entrepreneurial company's radio division. They brought him in and said, we're going to start a radio show, you're in charge. And I basically ran all of their radio stations. We had, 100 radio stations, I think, that we were on. And I remember telling this guy, and I are friends now, he was the best man at my wedding. And I told him when I saw him, I said, remember like 9 or 10 years ago when I would have to call you and leave voicemails saying, hey man, I want to try and renegotiate this one station. I think we can get a better deal. Do I have your approval? And you wouldn't even call me back. You're just like, and then finally you'd be like, all right, Andrew, do whatever you want. We don't care. Literally, seven-figure annual contract. Andrew, I don't care. You're in control. It's the exact thing I talk about in my video on, being a control freak. He's like, Andrew, I know producing radio. I don't know buying radio time. Just, I trust you. You do what you want to do. And that's a kind of thing that we never really got from. We had some great people on the retail side. We had some really nice people, actually. But, you never got that at scale, right? So it's a lot easier to have a much smaller number of people. We had some religious, like mega churches. We had, some other large clients. We had someone in the gold space. Some of these bigger clients with big budgets that knew the deal, that understood enough, same as I talk about in my video about being a control freak. They said they knew how to find the right person to handle their airtime. And then they were able just to kind of step back and say, all right, you handle it. And I really learned that I hate volume. What I want is to work with a select inner circle of people who know the deal, who, respect you and who just know that you'll get the job done. And that's where I found the longest running relationships. I don't like volume businesses, and I learned that seeing it up close and personal, doing both sides of the coin in the radio business. The last thing that I think was really interesting that I learned from years in the radio business, again, comparing different people in the retail side, was what I would now call builders versus hustlers. Okay. This applies, above any one particular business. This is just kind of a life concept that I like to look at now. Builders versus hustlers. I didn't have a name for it back then, but I learned the difference. What was interesting is some of my favorite people to work with, people who were my father's industry. They were money managers. They were, financial advisors. And to this day, we've got a few people that we help here at Nomad Capitalist who are in that industry. I just love these guys. Why? They're relatively, down to earth. They're really successful. And they just keep chugging along. They've been doing it sometimes, 10, 20, 30 years, right? And there's just a quiet confidence about that kind of person. So I always love talking to, the 52-year-old financial advisor who makes $1 million a year managing money, and he's just good at what he does. The other side, so he's a builder, right? He's been building his business. My father, came into the financial business at a young age. He just built and built and built and built and built, and became very successful at what he did. On the other side, what's interesting is you would see people who would get into the big new thing, right? The newest fad, the flash in the pan. And what was interesting over the course of the years that I was in the business was when I started out, real estate was hot as a pistol. Everyone was a real estate agent. Everyone was a mortgage broker. And at one point, those guys were so easy. I almost regret that I hadn't scaled the business up, that I hadn't invested enough in the business when I first started it back in 04, 05, because the real estate market, especially where I was in the Western US, was hot as a pistol. People were throwing money at you left and right because there was such easy money back then. But what happened when the real estate market started to slow down and then crashed? Where were those people in 2007, 2008? Well, I'll tell you. Number one, the ones that you had, they weren't paying their bills. And they were being nasty about it, right? The financial advisor said, hey, even though my business is down, I'm a builder. I pay my bills. I'm not a deadbeat. You know what? Because he's got a long-term horizon. This is his life. He's a financial advisor or, whatever it was. There's no one industry. But whatever it was, the builder was, an ethical person. They paid their bills. And you know what? Ups and downs, they were still in business. They had good years, they had bad years, but 30 years later, they were still standing. The hustler is the guy who got into real estate because it was hot. Maybe, we literally had guys who were restaurant servers. Nothing wrong with that, but you're a restaurant server, now you're positioning yourself as the number one expert realtor 6 months later. Those guys were just throwing money around. And what you found is the most successful hustlers would fail at that, and then they'd fold everything up and screw a bunch of people on their bills, and then they'd go and open a debt relief company. And then at one point it was gold. And you'd see these guys who they'd always have the latest thing. Now, I'm not trying to impugn serial entrepreneurs, but what I found interesting is the people who just weren't ethical about it. They were always on the next fad. They're always on the next bandwagon that was hot, right? In today's industry, with what we see at Nomad Capitalist, we see waves of things that are popular. And obviously there are some people who love running Amazon stores and love, selling sports equipment or whatever it is. Other people just jump on the bandwagon, okay? And so I really learned the differentiation between a builder and a hustler and determined, again, I've continued to crystallize it over the years, but really learned I want to be a builder. It's the environment I was raised in, it's the values I was raised with. I want to build something long-term and add value. Listen, if ever Nomad Capitalist goes away or is sold or whatever, I'm sure I'll figure out something else. And that doesn't mean that, again, being a serial entrepreneur is a problem. But jumping on the latest bandwagon is not necessarily something that I want to do. And it's probably not something if you're taking on clients that you want to do, because when the tide, washes out, you're going to be left with people who can't really deliver. So those are some of the things that I learned from my very first 2 businesses. Learned a lot in many years that I ran that, and would definitely love to hear your comments below on things that you took away from some of those lessons or other comments that you can add. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist. I wrote this book, which you can find on Amazon, to distill a lot of the stuff we talk about in these videos and a lot of the stuff I've learned over the last decade plus traveling all around the world, teaching you about how to legally reduce your taxes, build your personal freedom, and create wealth faster. definitely get a copy of this book if you want to learn more. Now, if you want to watch more videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel and make sure you click the notifications bell so you never miss one of our new videos with more tips on how to go where you're treated best. And if you're already a 6 or 7 figure entrepreneur and you'd like to put these strategies in place for yourself, go to nomadcapitalist.com and learn about how I can help you.